for breakfast. It doesn't matter to me if you slip out early. I will not take offense. I've been doing this long enough to know better. So we'll start in just a few minutes. Go ahead and settle in.
Morning. Glad you're here this morning. This is the third part of a four-part series that Evan and I are leading together. Am I echoing, or am I just hearing myself? Okay. Thank you. Just a moment. Is that any better? Yeah. That sounds better. Okay, great. Thank y'all. So we have covered water and land. This week we'll talk about food. Next week I hope you'll be here for a panel discussion, which will follow the theme from our Tippy lecture. We'll have Zachary Crow here on next Saturday to talk about decarcerate, and then have a panel discussion during this time on Sunday morning, and then the following week, we will talk about dominion. I invite you all to pray with me this prayer that we have in the gray on the top of your sheet. Let us pray. We give you thanks, most gracious God, for the beauty of the earth and sky and sea, for the richness of mountains, plains, and rivers, for the songs of birds and the loveliness of flowers. We praise you for these good gifts and pray that we may safeguard them for our posterity. Grant that we may continue to grow in our grateful enjoyment of your abundant creation, to the honor and glory of your name, now and forever. Amen. We're going to begin by talking about how early Christian communities broke bread together. Is there someone that would be willing to read this passage from Acts for us? Thanks, Evan. Thank you.
The new believers devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. All the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved.
Thank you. This is one of my top 10 favorite pieces of scripture because it tells us a lot about what it means to be Christian. and what it means to be in Christian community. I wonder what sort of things are standing out to you this morning. It can be related to food or completely unrelated. What are you hearing in this passage? What do you notice?
Here I come. As a reminder, I'll bring you the microphone so that those who are watching online can hear your comments as well.
Yeah, they shared everything in common, and no one went without.
Here I come.
Doesn't matter if you're rich or poor. There is no class system in this. They were all treated as equals.
Yeah, Sam? Here. Hold on. Here I come.
Well, what kind of strikes me is that there was a real community, unlike currently where everybody's at home ordering their food, their things. I was reading something on yesterday or day before about how movie theaters, there was controversy about whether it used to be that a studio would have to release a movie first to theaters before it could be streamed. Today, it can go straight to streaming. So I really miss the community of gatherings, because we've gotten, and for people my age, I'm a baby boomer, and millennials, there's an epidemic of loneliness. And it's, particularly in COVID, it's precipitated a lot of suicides. And I don't know, I was flunking out of college at one point, and then I got a job bellhopping at a 1,000-room hotel at night from 11 to 7. I worked, but just that, being around that many people energized me. So after that, I never got off the dean's list. And graduated with like a 3.0, even though I had about 14 hours of F on my transcript. So, at any rate, that's what I think about and what we're missing today.
The power of community is very real.
What?
The power of community is very real.
Absolutely.
Along the lines of community, I wonder whether this doesn't talk about their disagreements or whether the people who really had a lot were really that eager to give it up. And I wonder how that community really functioned.
Those are good questions. Wondering about those things that the text does not reveal to us. How willing were people to participate in a community like this? I find it really fascinating that in this short passage, we are told that they engaged in fellowship and the breaking of the bread. Then again, they broke bread in their homes and they ate together with glad and sincere hearts. So some of that sounds like early Eucharist. Some of that sounds like a biblical precedent for potlucks, something that I know I am missing in the age of COVID. But I find it fascinating that those things we still hold on to today. We're sitting gathered around breakfast this morning, or at least around coffee. Those are the things that have created Christian community throughout time. So I find it just interesting to note the way that that has continued throughout our history and how that's a foundational piece of who we are as Christians, food. We eat together a lot. I'm going to pass it over to Evan, who will engage us in a little bit of a thought experiment about our fridges.
Thanks, Adeline. As you can see on the handout, I want you to just stop and think about your house. Think about your food that is in your house. And I want to start with your fridge. If you have a fridge at home, I want you to think about all of the things that are in your fridge right now. And I wonder if you would just take a moment to make a list in your mind of everything that is in your fridge. Not what's missing, but what's in your fridge. Think about that. Try to make a list. In the house where I grew up, you are almost certain to find 5 or 6 bottles of mustard because nobody can remember, do we have the mustard or not? And so we pick it up, right? And if you look at the dates, they're like years and years old. What about your pantry? What about your cupboard? Not only the individual servings or the things that are ready to be used, but the ingredients, the spices, the flours, the sugars, the salt, the oil. Think about all the things in your cupboard. Could you name all of them? Could you name how much you have? I usually can remember when I run out of something I use a lot. But until I run out of it or have need of it, I don't often consider how much I have, how much is waiting on me. I wonder, what does that tell you? That exercise, just to stop and think about the things in your pantry, in your fridge, in your cupboard, trying to remember them, kind of laughing at that. And I bet even now you're remembering some that you hadn't thought of. Oh yeah, that's right, I forgot about that. The dill gherkins that Mom likes to eat when she's in town that nobody else eats, that have been sitting on that shelf in the door in the fridge for 4 years, right? What does the exercise tell you about God, tell you about food? Who's got Tammy over here on my left? Yeah.
It tells me that Mom and I have an abundance. We are blessed to have plenty, more than plenty.
Yeah.
Embarrassingly so.
Yeah. Wow. An abundance, even embarrassingly so. Yeah, thank you. What else does that exercise illuminate for you? What else? Yeah, Tammy, one more.
I need to clean my refrigerator.
Yes. Need to clean out
to
that
clean
fridge. Yeah. That's right. That's what I do when I go to my parents' house. I start throwing away mustard. Right? Yeah. Yeah, Liz.
There are certain items that we will try really hard not to run out. We value those items more than the others.
Yes. Certain items, and a lot of them are the same, right? But for some of us, they're different. Our house almost grinds to a halt without milk. Bread's pretty important, but we can get away with tortillas or salads or other things. But without milk, we're talking cereal, we're talking coffee, we're talking what we drink at the table, lots of things that grind to a halt. Yeah, what are the things that you always have on hand that you never run out of, or that if you do run out of, just think about that. Yeah. What else? What else do you see? What else do you notice, Tammy?
The thing that I noticed that kept getting pushed to the back of the fridge was a jar of homemade pickles made by my Uncle Bobby and canned in 1999. And he did a printed label on it, and it was just so dear. I can't throw that out.
Yes.
I can't throw that out. He died how many years ago?
Yeah.
But the other day I thought, well, it's been many, many years, so I thought I would try to open it and see if they were still good. Well, the lid is, I tried and tried. I couldn't open it, so I guess I'm keeping it.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's a great segue to the next question. Think about that thing for you, your Uncle Bob's Pickles. Think about what is it that keeps getting pushed to the back of your cupboard, back of the pantry. What is it? Why are you avoiding it? And how long are you going to keep it? Mark. Or maybe that inspires another story about the food you keep. Yeah, Mark.
So my refrigerator is a reflection of my relationship with my significant other. I never throw anything at all away, and any leftovers, rather than putting it in containers, I just keep it on the plate because I'm thinking next morning, I'm just going to throw it in there. There's no reason to put it in anything else. Well, she has a really big problem with that. So my refrigerator is a reflection of our relationship.
Yeah, yeah. Family and relationship and dynamics often get played out in the fridge or the cupboard. Yeah, yeah. What would you be sure not to eat the last of for fear of losing your life in the hands of that what, right? Yeah, yeah. What else? What else is that thing, that object, that talisman in your pantry, your cupboard, or your fridge that just keeps getting ignored, whether because it's of deep significance, so much so that you wouldn't eat it or throw it away, or what keeps you from throwing it away? Why haven't you gotten rid of it yet? How long? Will it be your children or your nieces and nephews or your progeny who will finally throw it away? What? Say more about that thing or those things in your fridge. And what does that tell you about your attachment to that thing, to what it represents, and more generally to food? We're little squirrels. We're hiding it away, aren't we? Hoping we can remember where to find it. Yeah? Thoughts about any other items that you want to tell us about? No guilt, no judgment in this area. You can share free of guilt. Yeah? Well, let's switch to the other side. Let me tell you a story. My old boss, Robert, you've heard a lot of Robert's stories. He came home, it was his birthday, and he came home only to find out that someone who'd been hanging around the church, someone who needed the donations of the church to be sustained, had found a way to his house. He did not live near the church, but near enough. And Calvin found a way to his house and knocked on the door, which is sort of a crossing of an important boundary. And before Robert got home, his wife, Mary Ward, gave away to Calvin the donut that she had been saving for his birthday. And Robert was furious, still tells the story, not angry at her, but at the situation, that she gave away his birthday donut to Calvin, who had the gall to follow him to his house and knock on his door. What's the one thing in your house, the one food in your house, that if you turned up this afternoon and somebody had given it away, thrown it away, or eaten it, what would be the one thing that would most get under your skin? What's the thing you don't want somebody else to consume, that you don't want to lose? Or maybe, to use another image, what's the one thing that if you open the fridge and you're out of it, that's just going to set you off? What's that thing for you? Bacon. Bacon. Yeah. What else for others? Yeah. 7 different milks, I hear. Yeah, so it's milk. Yeah, yeah. Some of those more important than others, right? But yeah, absolutely. For my mother, it's half and half for this, coffee. I mean, she'll put evaporated milk or, regular milk or something, but it's not as good. Yeah. What else for you? Well, I hope you can sense that there's a spiritual connection between the food that we hold in our cupboards and in our fridges, the food that we eat, the food that we don't want to be without. And that begins to play a little bit with issues of feast or famine. Adeline's going to take over, and she's going to talk about a liturgical connection that we make every day, every time we're together, and help us understand a little more, what does it mean to have a right relationship with food from a spiritual perspective? Yes.
I imagine you have all heard the Lord's Prayer. You maybe heard it this morning. Maybe you'll hear it in a few minutes. Maybe you said it to yourself as you woke up this morning. It's really familiar to us. We could read it together, but I know we know it, and we say it together quite often. I want us to think for a little bit about this phrase about daily bread. We ask God, give us this day our daily bread, or give us today our daily bread, or some other variation thereof. I wonder what daily bread means to you. When you say that, what does it mean? What does that communicate? Is it literally bread? Is it something else that you're asking for?
I believe that we're asking that we receive what we need and it be sufficient. We don't have to get overstuffed, just what is enough for us today?
Yeah, kind of the same thing. I think of it as that sustains us, gives us, fills our needs.
More than food?
Yeah, more than food, in your heart.
But not exclusive of food. Food and more? Okay. I think there's a lot to be said about that. Is it physical? Is it spiritual? Is it both? I appreciate letting me tease that out. Thank you.
What does it say about our relationship with God that this is part of the prayer that we offer most regularly? Or for most of us, I think it's the prayer we pray most commonly. What does it mean that this is part of that conversation we have with God?
I see it as when we ask to give us today whatever it is to sustain ourselves, be it physically or spiritually. When we're asking for that, we're also asking to receive it. You know, He's giving, and we have to be open to receive.
Well, I'm just thinking of things beyond food. I think of, God giving us intellect, imagination, the ability to reach out, and to be able to sort of co-create whatever it is that the gifts that you were endowed, whether you're a carpenter, a plumber, a computer programmer, or whatever, all that, in my mind, is, God being manifested in real things that we need to have in the world.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, go ahead, Evan.
I'm struck in this moment that we don't ask for our weekly bread or our monthly bread. Like, what does it mean to just pray for daily bread and to have to pray that every day? Mm-hmm. And what does that say about our relationship with God? Compared with how we otherwise engage with God in our spiritual lives.
Yeah, I'm struck by the fact that it indicates that in our relationship with God, I'm asking for sufficiency, which is not how I live. I live in great abundance. I'm fully aware I live in great abundance. I have more food than I need in my house today. I have more safety than I need, much more house than I need, more money than I need. Yet I'm asking God for what is sufficient for today.
And as Evan was talking, it sort of struck me about the daily versus the weekly nature, and the odds that I'm going to have a problem that is one day long. I'm going to have a famine or a lacking that only lasts for one day. Seems weird. It seems like if I'm looking at just my current needs and sort of subsistence, that's either going to be more or less right for a long period of time, or bad for a long period of time. It's not like, oh, Tuesday is the day I can't have breakfast. I had never really thought about that before.
Mm-hmm.
It's highly inefficient, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like if I woke up today and said, all right, what are we going to do for food today? And then planned and then went to the store and did that, I could do that. But that's not a good use of my time or even my relationship with God. So there's a tension there between what makes sense logistically and what makes sense spiritually. And I need to lean into that.
Thank you. Interesting you said tension, because I find it a bit philosophical that in the context we're asking a higher power to sustain us. historically, there's always been a trickle-down system where the higher levels of society are tasked with providing for, we can get into trickle-down economics, but I don't think that's the place for this. It's interesting that we feel a compulsion to ask for what we need versus finding or doing for ourselves.
That's really interesting to think about. Yeah. Well, I would be curious for us to think a little bit about daily bread. We could think about monthly bread or weekly bread or however it is. But whatever it means to have what is enough, and what is the gap between what is enough and what is feast, what is enough and what is famine. I know that I live my life much more on the feast side of things, and that there's a significant gap in my life between what is my daily bread, what is sufficient, and what is a marker of abundance. I'm curious how you notice some of those gaps in your own life.
I mean, when we're talking about feasts specifically, I think of all the food waste that I have. Like, oh, I intend to cook these things, and then I feel like I don't have the time or I don't want to, and then it's like, no big deal. It'll go in the compost. That's the big gap that I see immediately.
I often find myself thinking, well, at least I'm putting it in the compost, which is maybe not a productive thought, but similarly, food waste is one that is a marker of that gap. What else do you notice as things that mark the gap for you between what is enough and what is abundance, what is feast?
Hold on a second.
Well, I think there's a third branch of this tree, and that is what's so rampant in our society today is greed. We've got more stuff, and when you start relating, probably the most environmental helpful thing we could do is just to consume less. Yes, we've got an economic system that says that, we measure everything by GDP, which is driven by consumption. Well, it's sort of a trend without a future, because I think Mother Nature is already telling us, look, you've taken too much of my timber, too much of my natural resources, et cetera, et cetera. So there's some, I don't know where it picks up and leaves off between just, having more than maybe enough, and then just way too much. Do people really need 10,000 square feet home? You need 4 cars in the garage, and maybe 2 would do, and on and on and on. So that's what comes to mind. So, because daily bread is giving me what's sufficient. And even abundance is, but somewhere after abundance, there just becomes greed.
Yeah. The diagram that I've put on here shows the limits of Microsoft Word, because I think we would draw this out as a large spectrum where there's arrows that are going both directions between daily bread and feast and daily bread and famine. And we might attach labels to those arrows, things like greed taking us far towards feast or beyond feast, and things like generosity bringing us back from feast to a place of sufficiency. We could attach lots of labels there.
Along the lines of what you were saying about the greed and the waste and the impact that has on our environment, I've been doing a little experiment just for myself over the last year or so regarding the amount of non-recyclable plastic waste So I keep a paper sack under my bathroom sink. And whenever I've got a little tiny piece of plastic, like off a carton, you know, that little round top, or the little plastic thing you pull out of the milk to open it, milk or cream, or the little tiny things of dental floss that you get when you go to the dentist to get your teeth cleaned. Just, it's amazing the amount of little tiny plastic things that for years and years, I just threw in the trash until it's impacted the oceans, the lakes, the rivers.
First, I just have to say, sometimes my hearing is going bad. And sometimes I can't hear what people are saying, so I apologize if I'm going back over
That's all
old
right.
information.
We can hear it
But
again.
building on what the last couple of people have said, part of our relationship to food is how it's grown and how it's delivered to us. And so, you know, I've been taught to, when I pray Thanksgiving for my meal, to reflect on how did that food arrive at my table? You know, who harvested that? Were they treated well? You know, who's being treated well when it goes to the store? Are the employees being treated fairly? Look at how the animals are treated. If I'm going to consume pork or chicken, it's nauseating how the factory farms treat those animals. And that can't be good for you to eat that. So it's just about thinking about how the crops are raised, what chemicals are put on them, all of that. It all kind of goes into the relationship with daily bread.
Yeah. I appreciate all those thoughts that we could think about this for hours and hours and have a really wonderful conversation. I'll leave you with just this thought that I've put on here. I think in my life, me asking for daily bread might actually mean asking for less. And by that, I mean I might be asking God to show me opportunities for generosity so that I can help close the gap between myself and daily bread, and in doing so, help close the gap between famine and daily bread for another person, which feels really apt in this stewardship season. So I'll leave you with that to think about as Evan comes to think about more of our responses to this.
Thanks, Helen. My physician back in Alabama, before we moved here, noted that hunger, feeling hungry, not systemic hunger, but feeling hungry is a human experience that for most of us is very easy to fix. Because the answer to this moment of hunger is as far away as my cupboard, my pantry, my fridge, the checkout line at the gas station or wherever it is. And that leads to an issue of obesity. We aren't used to going to bed a little hungry. We aren't used to going through the afternoon a little hungry. That's a new phenomenon, at least for the vast majority of humanity. That reminds me that food is a spiritual issue as much as it is a physiological issue. We see lots of examples in the Bible, one of which we have from Acts, where there's a sense of community and togetherness that is both engendered by, but also reflected in, the breaking of bread and the sharing of food. Think about all the other examples in the Bible where food is featured as an example of celebration, of victory, of promise, or famine as a sign of judgment, or lacking spiritually. God uses famine to get the attention, or at least the ancients identify famine as a way to clarify our relationship with God. food and hunger are as much a spiritual thing as they are a physical or a physiological thing. Given that, what are you going to do about it? If you allow yourself just a little more space in your mind, in your heart, in your spirit, in your practice, in your habits, when you shop, when you cook, when you store, when you throw away, if you allow just a little more space in your life to consider the holiness and the spiritual richness of food, how would your life be different? I don't mean to solve the whole thing, but if you considered a little more fully the holiness of food, how would your life be different?
Okay, I'm going to go a little bit further in the prayer because something popped into my mind. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. And thinking about how Satan tempted Christ on the mount, command these stones to become bread. And as you mentioned, the ease of convenience food that surrounds us. And if we ask to be not led into temptation and deliver us from the evil of, if you want to look at it that way, of convenience food and fast food and quick food that perhaps the devil is tempting us with. When we look at food as being sacred, there may be instances where, it's not. So that's a thought.
Thank you. And the existence of food deserts. Even in highly industrialized, wealthy societies, even in our area, within an hour's drive, think about the places where it is hard to get fresh fruit and vegetables, nutritious food, and where the cost of it is exorbitant. Yeah, Haley, and then Sam.
You talk about the sacredness of food. I have drilled it into myself. Now I wake up every morning and I pray, and I go to bed and I pray, and I make that time. I do not make that time for food. Like, some days it happens that I prepare the meals, and some days it happens that I eat Cheez-Its for dinner. And, how can I put that same emphasis on food as I do with that conversation with God?
Thank you. Sam, right here in the middle table.
I guess kind of following up on this gentleman's comments, today, America's food and agriculture has led us to be gluttonous, and it's led to all sorts of other problems. Like I focus some on the environment of the oceans, and thinking about picking up plastic on beaches, or these vessels they have now that can go out and kind of scoop up plastic. But the real culprit in our environment is related to the way we produce food. 40% of all water pollution comes from agriculture. I grew up in Louisiana, and at the mouth of the Mississippi, there's just this huge algae bloom because all of the pesticides, herbicides, we get it all from every river in the country. And there's a correlation between the way if you can say 40% of water pollution comes from agriculture, that gives rise to us needing to drink water in plastic bottles, which gives rise to another. And the other thing that's really, we grew a tremendous amount of corn. And corn is used to feed animals. I hate to say it, but I used to work for one of the largest feedlot companies in the country. And it's used to make high fructose corn syrup, which is a real very detrimental to our diet, but it flips me to thinking about so many places in the world where people don't have daily bread. And I don't know how I know there's farm aid and a lot of things, but there's also other crops that could be grown on the same land that are much more nourishing. I mean, you can get protein out of rice and beans. You don't necessarily have to get it out of a steer or chicken. But in any event, there's such a worldwide hunger issue, and here we sit in America and we grow way too much food, and way too much food is consumed than what we actually need for our daily bread.
Thank you. That's a Angela, and then we'll transition to the second question.
So I've been reflecting theologically on all of these things and where bread shows up in the scripture. And I think about give us our daily bread when Moses is leading the Hebrews through the wilderness for 40 years. And they're like, where is anything? We should go back to Egypt. And God provides manna every single day. So that's the original kind of thing in my head. I also remember my professor, Margaret Amer, teaching me in Greek. And every day, we had a 6-week Greek intensive. Every day she would say, sufficient unto the day is the evil thereof, which comes from the Sermon on the Mount. So we've got this like daily bread needing sustenance, and sufficient unto the day is the evil thereof. There's enough evil and burdens and suffering for today, so we don't need to worry about the future. And I think about what you were just saying and how so much of these systemic inequities and problems are about control and trying to control the earth and trying to control our crops and control economic growth that really come from a scarcity mindset, from an individualized me, mine, I need to protect, which gets us into the Acts passage of there is sufficiency in this world if we trust God and we trust our community and we actually let ourselves not have enough, trusting that someone else will and can bring that to the community. And there's just so much control, individualized brokenness, and that goes all the way back to our ancient texts. And, that's exactly what the Hebrews were doing was, well, there's not enough. I'm not going to have enough. We need more for myself. And whenever they went and got more manna, it didn't go well for them. But this is like this perpetual, how do we get out of a scarcity mindset and into more of a sufficiency mindset, trusting the world when we live in a world that has set up systems where we can't trust?
Yeah, that brings me back to the gap that Adeline invited us to consider, the gap between famine and our daily bread and between feast and our daily bread, and not being aware of that gap or beginning to confuse them leads to greed. It leads to issues of inappropriate expressions of power and control and dominion, which we'll talk about next week as well. Not next week, 2 weeks from today, excuse me. Think about, as we wrap up, think about the ways in which what you see in the supermarket is as much God's creation as the rainbow or the vista or the rain on the meadow. And think about which things in the supermarket are easier for you to identify as God's creation, something we are to use but care for, and which ones are harder to see. And think about what is it about this particular loaf of bread that makes it easier to sense as God's creation than this loaf of bread? Why this apple rather than this applesauce? And how might that drive to see even the Karo syrup, the high fructose corn syrup, even to see that as creation, but also to recognize the steps or the stages that have hidden the createdness of the corn that was grown, and the harvest, and the rain, and the sun, and the fossil fuels in many cases, or the wind, or the solar. I mean, think about all the ways in which we consume on a daily basis God's creation without ever considering the creation that it represents. Think about, God says to Noah, the blood, and to us, the blood of an animal is its life. It belongs to me. When I buy that cellophane wrapped package of boneless, skinless chicken breast for $1.98, although inflation's getting us for $2.48 a pound, do I think about the life that was given, not only from the chicken, but the lives that are being given or supported by this strange system that has that so divorced from creation? And what does it mean to get back into food as creation? How would that consciousness change our consumption? How do issues like global warming, desertification, the pollution of water, landfill issues, waste issues, how are all of those affected by our individual decisions to consider the createdness of everything that we purchase and everything that we eat? That's something to hold on to. Those are big theological issues. Next week, we will hear from a panel talking about judicial reform and judicial issues in Arkansas. It's part of our weekend for our Tippy series. And then we'll come back the week after that, 2 weeks from today, to look at the issue of dominion, a really central theological principle that we hear echoed in today's psalm especially, but also in the Genesis reading as well, and one that we have to wrestle with faithfully if we're going to get this right. Thank you all for being here today. See y'all soon.